Gear up, because this is the Fuel Your Marketing podcast, designed to accelerate sales and grow your business. Let's welcome your host, Udi Sharma.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Fuel Your Marketing podcast, where we unpack what's really working in marketing and go to market today. And I'm your host, Udi Sharma. Now, today's guest is a name that you definitely know if you've been watching the future of marketing unfold. He has helped create and dominate a revenue intelligence category, took Gong from zero to multi-billion dollars, and has built an iconic brand that so many of us admire. So with me today, we have Udi Ledergor. Udi, welcome to the podcast, and we'd love to know a little bit more about you and your latest book. Unpack that for our audience.
Hi, Artie. Thanks for having me. I'm excited to be here today. It's been just a few weeks since I published Courageous Marketing, and it quickly rose to about a dozen bestseller lists on Amazon, so it must be resonating with people. The story behind the book is really I took 20 years of B2B marketing and condensed them into 200 or so pages. For almost 7 years, I was the chief marketing officer at Gong, and during that time and the years prior to that, I was fortunate enough to have a lot of great experiences that I'm trying to share with as many marketers as I can to inspire them to take the boring out of B2B marketing. And the last 2 years, I've been in my current role of chief evangelist, which has given me a little more flexibility with my time, which is why I could finally sit down and write this book. So I'm excited to see this out, and I can't wait to hear what more people think about it and how it's inspiring them.
Well, listen, congratulations on, first of all, on being the bestseller list. And also, I think that as marketers, when we kind of grow in our careers, we've gone through the lows and highs and seen everything. I always say from Microsoft DOS to AI, kind of that kind of it. You definitely want to give back. And what better way to kind of inspire others? So thank you very much once again for being here. I just can't wait to hear more about, how you've helped define a category with Gong. What trends based on that you did, and what trends are you seeing now, and how companies are really going to market in 2025, and what you see for the future?
So I think we've seen a lot of changes in the last few years. I know we're going to get to AI later, so that's maybe the obvious one. But when Gong created the revenue intelligence category, this was in 2019, I think almost every company at the time thought that they need to create a new category. And thankfully, that thinking has clarified a little and changed. So here's my very quick take on category. And of course, I do cover this in length in the book, but there should be one compelling reason why you would want to create a category. But before you go there, you should probably consider all the alternatives that are cheaper, less riskier, and are much faster. So if you're changing something about an existing category or changing a certain business flow, there are many ways to disrupt the category, extend the category, push the category boundaries, whatever you want to call it, but still work with that existing category. If you do that, analysts and customers will understand what you're doing because you have a reference point to something they already know, which means it'll be much easier to get coverage and talk to some buyers and analysts about something they already know. You won't have to educate the whole market, which takes years. You won't have to get analysts like Forrester and Gartner and even G2 to create a whole new category for you, which takes years. So there's many advantages in considering the alternatives before you jump into creating a new category. Now, having said all that, there are going to be cases where you're creating something so different from the existing state of the art that you want to consider creating a category. And in my view, the most compelling reason to do that is when your buyers, your prospective buyers, do not yet have a budget line item for what you're selling. Imagine the world 15 years ago before email automation systems. When companies like Eloqua and Marketo wanted to sell, there was no budget item to sell to. The same happened before CRM. The same happened before revenue intelligence. And so these pioneering companies had to create a category, had to go through this very heavy lift of market education, analyst education, buyer education, to convince people that there's a better way to do what they've been doing or doing something completely new, and that they should create a budget line item. And this takes years, not months, not quarters, but years. When you do it successfully and you're the category leader and pioneer, then the fruits are very, very rich because now you have created a category. You are synonymous with the category, like Gong has been for many years with revenue intelligence, now revenue AI. And then people associate that category and that budget line item with you. And once you establish that budget line item, all the future sales cycles are going to be infinitely easier because you don't have to create the budget from thin air. Your prospects already have it.
Goodness, you've given so much gold. I don't know what next question should I ask, but I have a few. So, so category creation is not the fastest way to build your market leadership. There's better ways you mentioned, and you talked about disrupting a category. In your experience and observing so many different brands, your advisor, different brands as well. What is the one disruption that you think always works, or probably 99% of the times will always work? Maybe it's a guerrilla marketing tactic, or is it something else? I don't know. But what is that disruption idea? If you could give our listeners an idea of disrupting the category instead of creating one.
There's two forces of play here. One of them is the product, which has to be real, and the other is the go-to-market and marketing version. And of course, they have to go together, because you can say certain things in marketing that are maybe a little bit ahead or a little bit inflated, but if the product doesn't actually deliver them, then even the greatest marketing can't save a mediocre or bad product. And so I always say this: I've been so fortunate to work at a company like Gong, where the product is so amazing and has been since day one, that it made everything infinitely easier for marketing and sales and everyone else in the company. So when I think about product differentiation or disruption, the two main things, if you're thinking about an existing category for a moment, the two main things that you can do are either say, I'm better, or say, I'm cheaper. Those are kind of the big roads that you have to choose. Now, if you say, I'm different or better, you need to be able to articulate succinctly and accurately how you are better so that people consider you. And if you say, I'm cheaper, you need to be able to show, and that's pretty easy to show, that you're significantly cheaper, but still have to have all the basic features that people need, and hopefully most of them. You can't really go to market by saying, I have all the same features, but I'm also half the price, because that's hard to believe. Why would you sell at half the price if you had all the same features? So a more effective message would be, if you look at like the car rental space, Avis is famous for coining the term, we try harder, because they were number two. So if you say, hey, I've got 80% of the features, but I'm 50% of the price, that's believable. If you say I've got 110 of the features, but I'm selling half the price, then I start wondering, like, what is this scam? Because there's a market price that I'm willing to pay. But let's go back to the different and better. So those are not exactly the same thing, because to stand out by being better than something that people know, you have to be significantly better. You can't just be 10 or 20% better, especially if you're looking to rip and replace a solution people are already using. That's not going to motivate them enough once they've integrated and deployed and trained people on a solution. To say that you're 10 or 20% better is not going to be enough for people to consider your solution. You have to be maybe 20 times better, and that's very, very hard to do. So a easier way is to say, I'm different. And that's where you either create a category or do something so different that people are forced to pay attention, that they can't ignore you. And so a term that unfortunately I did not coin, but I'm a big believer of, is different is better than better. When you think about your product strategy and your market strategy, if you think through the lens of how can I be different rather than being better, then you avoid the feature to feature comparisons. And when someone says, oh, aren't you just like this company? Say, no, that company is great at that thing that they do, but we are very different. Let me show you what we do and why you need this, either instead or on top of what you're doing with that other vendor. So try to avoid getting to the fight of, no, we're better. Let me show you. We've got these two bells and whistles. That's not a very compelling argument. When you say, no, we're completely different, and you can explain and demonstrate how you're different, that's usually going to get you ahead.
100%. When you're talking, the few brands that come to mind is HubSpot. Like, Salesforce was dominating the market, but HubSpot said, we're different for the small business segment, right? And then they started to add product, and they kind of, created their own category for a different niche of audience. And similarly, there's, when I look at Gong also, it's very interesting that you said that. Gong didn't just chase a market trend. I think you set a new one. It shows how important it is to build a market that you want to lead in. And I think when I look at GTM, like Jacko, Sangram, they're kind of, when GTM was something that there was no budgets for it. People were having, mediocre products going to market, lots of churn, no synchronization, no alignment. And these gentlemen, they got behind it. And now GTM has its own, I think, line item in lots of at least SaaS and technology companies, they understand that GTM is the way to go. You really hit a whole lot of points today. So what do you think is the most B2B brands are still kind of, getting it wrong when it comes to go-to-market?
I think what a lot of marketing teams and go-to-market teams get wrong is they try to follow best practices, which sounds reasonable if you're just getting started. Like, why wouldn't I follow best practices? The risk is very low. It's been proven. Lots of companies are doing it and they're probably achieving good results. But here's the problem. By the time anything becomes a best practice, it is in fact a boring practice. It is something that everyone is doing. And so the most you can hope to get by following best practices is ordinary results. If you want extraordinary results, you cannot follow best practices. You've got to do something different. It goes back to being different. And that requires courage, which is a lot of what I talk about in the book, going from best practice marketing to courageous marketing, which means looking around you, understanding what others are doing, and then finding your unique voice, having a strong, bold point of view that is remarkably different from everything that anyone is doing. That is the only way to stand out in a crowded market. If you are doing everything that others are doing, if your content sounds like other companies' content, if your ads and posts and emails and events look and feel like others, how are you going to stand out? You're not going to compete with your small budget as a startup against these big incumbents that are doing it better and they have a bigger team and bigger budget. The way to stand out as a startups, and there are great startups who know how to do this, is putting aside all those best practices and starting from scratch and saying, what hasn't been done yet? How can I do something that's completely different? And of course, there's many examples from companies like HubSpot and Wiz and Salesforce in the early days and Gong, where with a very small shoestring budget, we were able to stand out by doing something very, very different. Either choosing a look and feel for our brand, which is very different from what was common at the time. When Gong launched its first meaningful visual identity in 2018, everyone in our space was using what one of my team members called Series A blues. All these like unoffensive blue shades that go with white and gray, and they were just so boring. So we said, okay, what is the exact opposite of that? And we ended up going with fuchsia pink and purple and slapping a bulldog mascot on top of that because nobody was doing that back then. Now, lots of fun brands have animals as their mascots, but back then it was not as popular. So people noticed us. And then we looked at the tone of voice that people were using. And most of them sounded very official and stuffy because people confused authority with sounding that way. But we decided we're going to be an authority by being the opposite of that stuffy, condescending tone of voice. We're going to be the helpful person that you go to when you have a question or you need help. And so we always had a very unbuttoned, casual, friendly tone of voice. And that stood out because people are like, oh, this is content I enjoy reading. This is content I want to share with others because they can learn from it. And it doesn't sound like a analyst report. And every aspect of our marketing and brand, that's what we did. We said, what is everyone doing? What is the exact opposite of that? Again, because different is better than better.
No, I agree. You guys have taken a very bold, especially yourselves, when I look at your trajectory, a very bold human first approach to marketing. And I think this is what we're talking about. And I think what you're saying, if I'm getting it right, is that, marketers need to balance creativity and performance. While you just talked about the creative aspect of it, that how could you be different? And when you talked about the blues and Series A blues, I think at the time there were not very many women in decision-making seats. Our ICP was more male-dominated, and in PE firms there was not a whole lot of women on the table, right? So maybe the blue was more including them and talking to that ICP could be that. I remember my designer once told me when we were undergoing a rebrand, he says, "We're not going to do any blue or green." Because we're 16-year-old, this is our third or fourth iteration of our website and our brand. And we just recently went through a rebranding, 6-7 months ago. And everybody in the team said, no blues. We just have to make it very neutral, but at the same time, no purples either, because we're just trying to get. So I think it's all about your story and how bold you want to be, how you want to perceive your brand. So talk to me what is your advice for companies trying to build a brand that actually stands out in crowded markets? Like, are there any few things that, brand marketers, CMOs, and marketing creative directors should consider?
Yes. So risking sounding a little like a broken record, but it goes back to how can you be different? but still relevant to your audience. And I think a lot of marketers who've been in B2B for too long, they have these misconceptions about, oh, we're selling to this very serious executive or buying committee. Like, we can't talk to them as if they were on TikTok or Instagram or somewhere like that. But talk to anyone who's been in B2C marketing, and they'll say, well, of course you can, because these are the same people that while you're on an important Zoom call, they're scrolling their TikTok or Instagram. Of course, that's the language that they speak. What do you think they do for fun? Read your 40-page white paper? No, they go on Instagram and they check out their family and friends and watch silly cat videos. So once you understand that behind the big titles and the big corporate names, we're all the same human beings.
Human
We
beings, yeah.
we all have the same coffee and we go to the bathroom and we do everything like you, then you can start speaking that language. And I can't count how many times I've heard this from marketers who are selling to quote unquote serious personas like finance or IT. Like, oh, we can't speak to them like that. And I'm like,
Mhm.
just try it. Have you tried it? No, we would never. Just try it. And then they try it and say, oh my gosh, it worked. People actually engaged with that post for the first time. Like, yeah, because they're human beings. What do you expect? Go talk to your audience as if they were human beings. And I do break down a formula or several in my book, talking about content and what worked for Gong and other companies that I've studied, that most companies get wrong. And if I try to encapsulate it very quickly, there's two things to keep in mind. First, separate content marketing from product marketing. That's maybe the number one mistake I see companies making with their content. They either have one person creating both, or they don't even understand the difference between both. And when all the content that you're putting out there is about your product and how your customers are using it and all the features and bells and whistles that it has, that is appealing. The good news is it is appealing. The bad news is it's only appealing to 5% of your market. Here's why. Most of the marketers I know at this point have heard about the 95-5 rule. It was coined by the LinkedIn B2B Market Research Institute. And what it states, and you can go look this up if you want to read more about it, is that only about 5% of your target audience is currently in market to buy a solution in your space. Now, I can get into the reasons, but let's just put that aside and accept it at face value right now. What this means for marketers is that all your sales content, all your product content is only appealing to these 5%. If you don't believe me, let's think about your own life. If you were buying a car, so 3 months before you buy a car, you're probably going to go into all the car manufacturer websites that you're considering. You're going to go to YouTube to look at reviews. This is what I did before I bought my last car. I look at some of the review videos on cars that I'm considering buying. I'll go to the review sites and look at the different comparisons and testimonials. Then I'll go read all the the car specs and all that. But then I buy a car. And for the few months after I buy a car, the last thing I want to do is get more information on cars, because now I'm in the process of falling in love with the car that I just bought. This is the car I'm going to be with probably for the next 3 years. So why would car manufacturers continue to advertise and retarget me and show me the latest spec and their latest deals? Dude, I just bought a car. Like, why would I want to read that? Now, if we all agree that that doesn't make sense, then why are so many B2B marketings only showing their product and sales content to prospects, knowing that most of them are not in the market right now? That's not how you're going to get them to love you and follow you and look forward to more content from you. That's going to work only for those 5% that are in market. Now, when you understand that, you realize you need a different marketing plan for the 95% who might be in market in 18 months or maybe in 2 years. How are you going to engage with them now to create a memory link between what you're selling and your brand name, so that in 18 months when they are in market, you are the first name that they think of? And the way to do that is not product marketing. That's the way to drive them away and alienate them so that they unsubscribe and unfollow you. If you want to nurture them, if you want to engage with them, if you want them to associate you with valuable content, that's where great content marketing comes in. And it usually solves a big problem that your audience has, but that solution does not require buying your product. And that's the catch part that so many marketers get wrong, and they have to shove their product everywhere. And that's how you lose the audience or don't build it as fast as you could be.
You're right. You probably lose building that community of raving fans in the future. And I think that's why most marketers, when I speak with them, they, when we get on calls, they know their total addressable market, they say, we have got such a big, huge TAM. I'm like, okay, not everybody's in the market right now. What's your total relevant market, right? So that's what we need to get into. And I agree with you 100% that you can't have the same marketing message to 100% of your audience. It's only 5% and then 95%. I believe in that rule so much. Especially when we work with B2B SaaS, that's a differentiation we always bring, so I'm glad that you brought that up. So modern go-to-market motions, everyone's talking about go-to-market, everyone's talking about variety of different motions. GTM partners talk about 6 categories. No, you can't choose every motion. Would you agree, Udi, that you can be active in every motion to go to market? And how do you prioritize those? What is working for you? What will differentiate you? What will tell your story better? What will engage your audience better? How do you kind of prioritize what is working for you? Do you have any kind of a formula that you've shared in your book, or anything that you've learned from your experience?
When you say motions, are you referring in this case to marketing channels or something
That's right.
else?
Yeah, it could be marketing channels as in terms of, do you do events? Do you do speaking? Or do you do kind of, inbound? Do you, whatever channel you want to choose, right? So,
I'm a big believer in focusing. I do this in my personal life, and I do this
hmm,
in work. There's a very helpful model. So we're expanding a little out of the marketing question you started with, but I'll get back to it. There's a psychological framework that I love to use in cases like this. It's called the 4 burner stove model.
mm,
For those listeners who haven't heard about it, go look it up. There's a million articles out there about the 4 burner stove model. What it states is very simple. Here it is in 30 seconds. Imagine you have a 4 burner stove like most of us have at home. Um, what would happen if you put all of them on high? First, you'd run out of gas very quickly because you probably don't have enough gas to run all of them on high for a while. Two, you'd probably burn everything on them, right? So that is your life, and that is any part of your career or life that you're trying to manage. Now, imagine that that 4 burner stove represents 1 burner is your career, the second one is your health, both physical and mental. The third is your relationship and your family, and the fourth is your social life and other considerations, right? Now, if that is your 4 burner stove, and for most of us, those are kind of the big priorities in life, you have to be conscious about which burners I'm putting on high right now that I'm focusing on, and which ones I'm consciously putting on low and saying, you know what, I'm not going to meet friends for the next 2 weeks because I've got all this career deadline stuff and my kid is going through games that I want to be at. So I'm going to put family and career on high this week or this quarter or this year, and I'm going to put some others on low. When you do that consciously, I think it highlights the fallacy of career life balance, work life balance. A lot of us are trying to tell ourselves that, oh, this is so hard. Yeah, of course it's hard, but there is a way to not live in constant guilt. And that means that if you have to go on a work trip, you explain it to your children. You're like, okay, kids, I just launched a book. This is from my real
mhm,
family dinner conversations. I just launched a book. So for the next couple of months, I've got a lot of business travel. I'm going to make sure that almost none of it is on weekends so I can be home and spend our weekends together. But you're going to have to help your other dad during the week while I'm away because I have to go launch my book. Lots of people want to talk to me about the book. So I'm literally doing a world tour. And every week I'm in a couple of cities across the world. And so now I'm consciously prioritizing this part of my career for the next few months. And I'm explaining it to my kids, and I'm definitely going to be with them all summer. And I prioritize all my weekends. And I have a very high bar for dinner events that I usually decline on auto mode because I want to spend dinner with my family every night. So by doing that tweaking of which burners I'm putting on high, which burners I'm putting on low, you can you can do this trick, this mental trick with yourself for a day, a week, a quarter, a year, and even longer than that, and say, hey, this is a time where I'm focusing on my children and my health. And sometimes I might have a month where I won't go to the gym as often or I won't take care of myself because I've got some really burning other priorities that I need to handle. So once we kind of understood the bigger global model, now bring that into your marketing and say, okay, I can't be successful on 20 channels. I don't know a team that can be successful on 20 channels, even in the largest companies. So what I do is I make thoughtful experiments that I can actually learn from and focus on. And as soon as I see reassuring signs that something is working, I'm going to double down on that and I'm going to pretty much ignore everything else. And that's what we did at Gong. We did very early experiments on different channels. We weren't sure where to find the sales leaders that we were targeting. We tried Twitter, we tried Facebook, we tried YouTube, and then we found that we were getting the best responses on LinkedIn. As soon as we understood that, within the course of very few months, probably weeks, we simply ignored the other channels. We went very deep on LinkedIn, understanding the algorithm and the behavior and the psychology of when people use it and how they use it and what will make them engage and what the algorithm is prioritizing, which changes from month to month. So you have to like read the developer's blog and look at what others are doing on the platform to understand experiments so you don't have to do all of them yourself. And we purposefully created content for LinkedIn, and then we recycled that on other channels to get the long tail. But by doing that, we became immensely successful on LinkedIn. Whereas if we had tried to optimize for 20 channels, we would be so superficial on the understanding of how they all work that we never would have succeeded on any of them.
100% agreed. You got to do a few things and do them right, and then do it with passion and back it with data. I think that's the way to go. That's how I think smart marketing brands that I've been observing start up to, taking their ARR to millions rapidly is what they do. Few things and do it very, very focused. I love the analogy of your, four burners. I didn't know the four burners, but I have something similar, which I call a life plan. You've got 8 buckets, spiritual, family, marriage, and all of those categories, your work and your friendships and your social and, all of that. So in my experience, I've been doing this practice for about 2015. I took a program with Michael Hyatt and I did that. And every year on April 5th, I do a life plan. So I look at my life plan and I kind of just go back. So I kind of made it very intentional to say, oh, we're prioritizing. And I think for business as well, you set your goals and you kind of, move back. So 100% agreed. Now, storytelling and customer wins. I think there needs to be kind of a integration and alignment of that, but many people don't do it right, or they kind of slap the case study or the testimonial on their website without telling the story. And so, how should marketers kind of think of customer advocacy and embedding these stories deeper into their go-to-market or their overall marketing strategies? Any thoughts there?
If you're in marketing and probably in anything go to market, you should become a master of storytelling. I can't stress this enough. It's been known for many years that your customers are much better marketers than any marketers that I could hire. And so that's one thing to keep in mind, which means you can keep telling everyone how great your product is, but they're just as likely to believe them as you are to believe a vendor trying to sell you. But if they talk to peers that they respect and trust and see them as someone equal in the same industry, in the same company size, in the same geography, then they're much more likely to listen to them. So absolutely working with customers to extract their stories and then amplify them through customer testimonials, through speaking opportunities, presentations and case studies and press releases and all that. That's absolutely necessary. But I will say storytelling is such an important skill. If you go through a presentation that all it has are bulleted slides, nobody's going to remember those at the end. There's enough research to support this. It's not just a hypothesis. Like, nobody's going to remember your bulleted slides. But if you inject a few interesting stories to make a point, but an actual story with a beginning, middle, and end, people will remember how that made them feel. They will remember a lot of the details. And I really dived into storytelling throughout the last 18 months or so as I was working on my book. And I read a bunch of books about storytelling and developing stories. And it's just amazing the impact that this can have. And now I inject them a lot in my story. Like you asked me about prioritizing channels. I could have given you a bulleted list, but I gave you the 4-burner stove model, which I'm sure you and the listeners will now remember and use that as a guiding reference. So instead of just spewing out the answer, I'm giving a story to frame this. And there's a great book called Stories Sell, which it's by Matt Dix, if I remember correctly. And I highly recommend it. Just reading through his stories made me realize how far my capabilities are from his in storytelling, and wanted to make me practice and aspire and do some of his exercises to become a better storyteller.
It's awesome. And I'll throw another book for our listeners. It's called The Story Brand by Donald Miller. I like Donald's approach as well, especially if you're like looking at your digital presence and whatnot. That's a very good reference point. So 100% agreed. You don't control the narrative. You kind of evoke that emotion. And I think, think of it like movies. We all know that, the lead roles will come together and, it'll be happy ending. But at the end of the day, we all want to see how that is taken, the process of it and how everything is unfolding. The emotions go up and, high and low. And so I think this is the same with any kind of story. I think any kind of brand, I think they need to be emotionally involved. And storytelling, I feel, is a strategy now. It's no longer just, a word that we use lightly. You said in your intro you're here to inspire other marketers, and I want to really touch upon your book, of course. But I think what is important for our listeners, because most of our listeners are C-suite as well as mid management marketing leaders. What skills or traits should marketers be focusing on to grow their careers, especially in this digital age? We've come a long way, and careers are shifting. We didn't have GTM leaders or CROs and CXOs as titles back, I would say 3 years. So marketing has definitely changed, I think, over 5 years faster than what it changed, the 20 years prior. So um, give us your whole, take on this.
The whole take is going to take a while, but I'll give maybe two important points that could act as north stars that any marketer who follows them probably can't go wrong. Number one is remembering that your first team is your management team if you're the head of marketing, and your second team is your functional marketing team. If you remember this and you prioritize the problems that you solve to first be the ones that your first team needs, that is, if let's say someone in sales is not creating enough pipeline, but you can help solve that, then you are now the hero. If there's a problem, this is a real example from twice at my time at Gong. I was approached to help with our employer branding because we're hiring hundreds of employees this year, and we want to get consistent messaging around why we're the best place to work at, which we are, and that's a marketing skill, usually even more than an HR skill. So HR came to me now and also a few years ago and said, "Udi, we need help with our employer branding. This is out of our kind of wheelhouse. Can you help?" I'm like, "Of course." It's not a traditional marketing task, maybe, but it's what my first team needs. So I'm working now and leading this project for my chief people officer of our employer brand. So if you consistently solve problems that the big business around you has, that's how you get ahead, and you are perceived as someone who can think strategically and solve the biggest problems of the business, not just how to optimize likes for your social posts. The second thing is optimize for sales. Demonstrate how you make sales easier. And I dedicated the whole last chapter of my book to how to, in practice, collaborate with sales as if your career depends on it, because it does. It does. And so I almost co-wrote this chapter with my longtime CRO at Gong, Ryan Longfield, and we broke down the 5-part framework of how Gong's marketing and sales collaborated so well throughout these years. I've never seen a go-to-market motion succeed when sales and marketing are not collaborating well and when they're operating as silos. And every time I get brought in to advise a marketer, and I hear in the first meetings that they're operating completely separate from sales, I'm like, this is the first thing we need to fix, or else whatever you do is going to fail. If you are not demonstrating daily how you're making sales easier, if you don't understand where sales is struggling, where they need your help most, and showing how what you're doing is helping solve their problems, there's no way you're going to succeed. Doesn't matter how clever your ads are or your copy is or how beautiful your colors and logos are. That's not going to make any difference in the world. You're not demonstrating how you're making sales easier. So those are the two things. One, solve your first team's problems before your functional teams. Two, demonstrate how you're making sales easier.
I love it. I always talk about first team approach to my leadership team, but I think what I'm taking away is also the second team, functional teams problems. I think that's so critical because sometimes we're all keeping an eye on the vision, the future, and thinking about the big goals, big rocks, but we're not looking at how the people who have to execute, how are we supporting and empowering them. Just it.
That's a whole other issue, which has also got a whole chapter in my book, how to build a courageous team and motivate people to do their absolute best work. So that's very, very critical.
100%. And I think the doers need to be empowered in order for them to do better. And you've hit on so many points. I have a pen, I am writing down, and we'll summarize for our audience. But I think what you talked about is alignment. And then previously you talked about the product. You gave an example of the product team and the content marketing team. And then you'd given an example of marketing and sales team. I personally think, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, and everyone in our ecosystem is talking about that alignment, not siloed departments. And I think the alignment has to be a complete alignment within all different business units. Otherwise, we're going to risk our growth. We're going to risk our future I think future forward thinking, and I think that's where we need to identify the first team approach, of course, but the functional approach, so aligned. I'm so glad that we're talking about this, Udi. So marketing, leadership, courageous, bold steps that we need to take. But sometimes, marketers, and I'm going to dig this deeper because how can CEOs and CMOs empower? You talked about, and it's in your chapter in your book as well. But what is the least we can do? I mean, talk about data-driven approaches. How do you do those one-on-ones to empower your marketing, teams, and your marketing manager, your marketing director? What should be in those one-on-ones to inspire them to take more more of their decisions, which are not dependent on anybody else? They're empowered. Sometimes, people don't make decisions, and I think that bothers me as a leader because and then when I look back, I'm like, maybe I didn't empower them to make that decision, right? So decision making is a critical role in creating empowered teams. How can CMOs and C-suite empower the functional teams?
Someone who covered this much better than I did is Adam Grant in his latest book, Think Again. He quoted some great research that was done on high-performing teams at NASA and other organizations. And I'll give you one big takeaway that if you want to read the full story, which you should, go to Adam Grant's book. But I also embedded the sort of marketing angle of this in the chapter of my book titled "Building a Courageous Team." And the formula there is two components that have to be in a very high-performing team that take risks and experiment and make decisions, as you called it. And the first element to do that is giving them the psychological safety, which means that you're creating an environment where they feel that they can fail safely. They can take risks and do experiments and trial and error without fearing for their jobs or any sort of retaliation. And not every manager or leader can do that. There are many leaders who create an environment either by micromanaging or by demonstrating that they're only following best practices and they're not looking for any deviation. That's not going to motivate a team to take risks and experiment and trial and error. It also matters how you respond to mistakes or failed experiments. Do you reprimand them for taking them in the first place? If you do, that's the last time they're going to do that. Do you fire someone for trying something well within their kind of responsibilities, but not going as planned? Does that person get reprimanded or worse? Then nobody else on the team is ever going to take another risk or try something interesting outside of the run of the mill. So how you act really makes a difference in creating that psychological safety. So that is the first element that has to be in a team, that you want to see them take risks, make experiments, try new things, go to the edge of what other teams like them are doing and try something new. Not every team can create that psychological safety. So that's the first thing on one hand. The second part of it, which counters that, because creativity can go in many, many different directions, but at the end of the day, we're not a creative agency. We're running a business, and we need to hit business goals, and those need to be measurable, and they need to arrive on time. So that's what Adam Grant calls process accountability, which doesn't sound very exciting, but what it means in my terms, the way I talk about process accountability is these are the business metrics and the North Stars that we need to hit. Now, go take all the freedom that you need to get there. I don't care how you get there. And I give many examples of this in the book where we had a mission to accomplish, and I just wanted my team to go crazy with creativity and like not leave any door or window shut. Just go look everywhere, find interesting ways of doing this as long as we hit those goals. When those two things happen, when they have the psychological safety on one hand, the process accountability of what we are trying to achieve at the business level on the other side, that's where the magic happens. That's where you see your teams doing their best work. Doesn't matter if they're in product, sales, or marketing.
Yeah. So, if it helps our audience, I'll chime in. I struggled with it, initially, and I'm like, man, I didn't want you to do this, and you've gone ahead into a different direction several years ago, and then we created something called accountability levels. So I go back and say, hey, here's the project vision. I want you to go get me to this outcome. That's like do and explore. Second is, let's say, I've given you the project vision. This is my vision. I'll come in at the end. So you go and experiment, research, and bring me your out findings and whatnot. And then third is do as I tell you to do. So this way now they have the framework to kind of, what is their boundary and what can they explore, and I attach a budget to it and the number of hours you can spend on it, just so that, you're not going crazy, because as you said, we're not a creative agency. We've got business NSM to hit. Uh, you know, it's been such a rewarding conversation. It will be not helpful if I don't ask you this question. One more question, I promise. So your career is a masterclass in itself. It's in courageous marketing. You went from being a CMO to a chief evangelist. What advice would you give to marketers who are kind of at the CMO level and they want to kind of take a leap of faith and get into either a founder level or a CEO level, or kind of go up one more level, especially in today's changing environment? You talked about sales-led marketing and marketing sales alignment. That's one I would think. But what other things would you say would help them in their career?
Anyone who's already a CMO realizes this if they got here and stayed in that role so far, that you have to stay adaptable to what's happening in the market right now. Things are changing faster than ever before, which with the 25 years I've been in business sounds like such a cliche because we've always said that. But the pace has actually accelerated, right? The old laws that determine how fast data was being created and how fast technology are changing, all that is in a whirlwind right now with AI. And so if you want to stay relevant and stay with pretty much any organization now, it doesn't matter if you're in agriculture or marketing or government, you have to understand AI. You have to understand, at least in broad terms, what it can and cannot do and how to use it and when to consider using it for either productivity or creativity or whatever you're trying to accomplish. You don't have to do everything with your own two hands, but you have to know how to hire the right people and what questions and what guidance to give them so that they do that. And so that's going to help you if you're looking even stay in your role, let alone get into a new role. And then the other thing I would think about is just the seasons of life, and going back to the four burner stove. Like, where do you want to be right now? Which burner do you want to put on high? I have children who are in kind of middle school age right now. I really want to hang out for the next few years while they still want me around before I become that embarrassing dad that nobody wants to hang out with. Which, if you ask some of my kids, I'm probably already there. But I don't want to be traveling full time. I don't want to be on 12 Zoom calls a day right now. I want to be able to go to their games and their concerts and hang out with them and check in with their homework. And I made some conscious career choices to support that right now. In 5 or 7 years, when some of them are going to be out of the house, will I have more time for my career and maybe do something more challenging? Yeah, probably. So I think that's kind of combination. Stay adaptable and abreast with all the latest developments as much as you can in your field. Nobody can be on top of everything, so that you can have an intelligent conversation about what's happening and be considered for the roles that you want. But at the same time, be conscious and guide your own decisions based on your seasons of life and your own four burner stove. Like, what are you consciously putting on high right now? And what are you putting on low, and are okay with that, knowing that in 1 year or in 3 years or in 5 years, depending on your life circumstances, you might be able to shift the gas to a different burner.
100%. That's so powerful. It's one life. Career is part of it.
You only get one.
Yeah.
At least that's what my faith tells me. But
Yes, 100%. And then you know what? I believe strongly that you got to live intentionally to be happy, joyous, and successful. So, what's one marketing trend as a marketer in this era do you think we should not survive or doesn't survive in 2025?
hopefully we'll see the use of AI become more deliberate. Right now, we're seeing an influx of garbage content that's created by AI that nobody wants to consume. It reminds me, it's a cycle, it's a market cycle like anything. It reminds me of 10 years ago when people discovered they could outsource or offshore a lot of the content creation. They were proud for creating blog posts for $50, and nobody wanted to read them, of course, because just because you can create it doesn't mean you should create it. And so I'm hoping to see at least the good marketers use AI for the things it's really good for, and use human intelligence and courage and creativity for the things that AI is not good for, and we are.
Different is better than better.
Different is better than better. You heard it here.
And yes, 100%. And then I agree with you, deliberate use of AI, and don't be sporadic. Just don't go on every trend. And I just don't know if I'm prepared to buy from bots like AI avatars yet, but I'm gonna get there.
Depends what. If I'm looking for a phone charger, I'll happily buy it from a bot. If
Yeah.
I'm looking for
Not a B2B. Yeah.
no, if I'm looking for a complex B2B software that needs to integrate with specific environments that I have, I probably want to speak to a human for sure.
Awesome. Well, everyone listening, trust me, you want to be following Udi for some of his boldest, most authentic marketing takes out there. So, Udi, how can our people and our listeners, get in touch with you, follow your work? Where would you say they go?
Yeah, the two places would be one, start by getting Courageous Marketing on Amazon. That's my book, Courageous Marketing. It's on Amazon, Barnes and Nobles, wherever books are sold. That's 200 pages you will not regret reading, hopefully. And that's a great starting point. And then I'm also happy to connect with anyone on LinkedIn. Would love to hear your take on the book and take the conversation from there.
Great. And for our listeners, we'll post both of those links. And if you haven't yet, make sure you subscribe to the Fuel Your Marketing podcast, the conversation where we bring amazing leaders like Udi and who are shaping the future of how we grow, how we market. So share this episode with as a marketer, share the word, bring it to a founder or your next meeting and a leader who needs a little bit more boldness and strategy in their playbook. Until then, keep fueling your marketing. And thank you once again, Udi, for joining us.
Thank you for listening to the Fuel Your Marketing podcast. For more episodes, visit www.fuelyourmarketing.ca.